Hi Year 11. Welcome to this revision session. This one's going to be running through some key things you'll need to remember regarding Sheila Burling from an Inspector Calls. So before we get into the specifics of her character, remember you need to be able to talk confidently about context, which is your assessment objective 3. You need to show an understanding of the social, historical background, and for someone like Sheila, understanding women's place in society at the time that this was set is really important. So we're going to look just very briefly at the window of time between 1900 and 1950 for women, and remember at this time Sheila Burling is in the play that is set in 1912, so she falls nicely into this period of time we're looking at. So in the late 19th and early 20th century, women in Britain didn't have the same rights as men. It was very much still a patriarchy. The power was very much with the males of the family. So women just didn't have autonomy, meaning they didn't really have their own sense of power and ability to do whatever they pleased in the same way that men could. So the biggest thing really was that they were unable to vote and that they were paid less for doing similar jobs to men. The women were just not valued in society in the same way as men were. Women were not highly regarded at all in terms of their ability to work in the same way as men were. So Edwardian middle and upper class parents often encouraged or sometimes forced their children to marry for money. A woman's life was seen as secure once she was married. Sheila and Gerald are a love match, although Burling has a keen eye on the financial gains. So just to add to that, obviously Sheila Burling is in a much more privileged position, being born into a family that has already got established wealth. So in that respect, she's very much safe, we'd say. But really, a woman's ambition mainly was to make sure that she could secure a good marriage, which ensured a good life for her. You've got to remember at the time, women were very much property of their male. So until they were married, they were very much ruled by their father. And then when they were married, that was all passed over. That was passed over to the husband, and the husband then assumed that control and that power. So Sheila and Gerald are a love match. They are together because they are in love, also it seems at the beginning. But Burling, as you can see in Act 1, definitely has his eye on how this can financially help him as well. So the businesses would be coming together and he would be benefiting. And so he's very much in favour of this marriage. The campaign and movement for women to have the vote was known as suffrage. British campaigners for women's suffrage had always tended to use peaceful forms of protest. That's how it began. They had tried to win sympathy with the public and in Parliament, but they were making little progress. So this is when things started to change then, because as a result, in 1903, a woman named Emmeline Pankhurst founded a new group called the Women's Social and Political Union. She planned to make sure that the cause was finally noticed. She was known as the leader of the suffragettes. And in that phrase, she planned to make sure that she was finally noticed. That's suggesting there that much more violent and aggressive measures were used to ensure that they achieved their goal and women got the vote. So just to continue with some context, Sheila, like Eric, you can mostly consider the two of them together really in this play, allows Priestley to show his opinions on youth. Remember, Priestley uses the characters very much to communicate his ideas in this play. And Priestley felt that there was hope in the young people of post-war Britain. Priestley very much believed that there needed to be change, and he believed that it's the younger generations that could bring that about. He saw them as the ones who would help solve the problems with the country, such as class, gender and social responsibility. And just to remind you here that Priestley was very much a socialist, and he wanted to see collective responsibility. He wanted to see that people were taking responsibility for others and not just considering themselves. So Sheila epitomises the ability people have to change, and this is the message that Sheila is there for. She has a huge transformation from a very stuck-up, materialistic, immature young girl, as she's presented at the beginning, and she takes a huge transformation to become sympathetic to the socialist cause and very much responsible for her actions, and she's remorseful, and it severely impacts her. So that shows that change. But the fact that she started the way that she did would have you assume that she's not able to change, very much like her parents. But the fact that she does is Priestley showing that we are capable of that change, and that was the message he was trying to deliver to his audience in 1945. And Priestley hoped that by presenting Mr. and Mrs. Burling in such a negative manner, and by presenting Sheila and Eric in a much more forgiving light, the audience would be more inclined to agree with the socialist attitudes presented by Sheila, Eric and the inspector. So you've got to think about the way Priestley actively presents characters. The characters he won't want the audience to sympathise with. He does this to ensure that by the end of the play, the audience don't feel that they can have or share the beliefs of those characters, because they are made to look daft, to look ignorant. And those characters that he presents in a much more favourable light, he does so to ensure that we want to feel and believe in the same things they do. So he uses the presentation of his characterization to get audience either on side or to greatly dislike characters for this purpose. So her role in the play, what is her purpose, or what does she do? So at the start of the play, we learn that the Burling family are actually together celebrating the engagement of Sheila and Gerald Croft. And in the opening stage direction, she's described as being a pretty girl in her early 20s, very pleased with life and rather excited. So stage directions, as a reminder, please don't forget about them. They are really important and they tell us a lot about the character, particularly the Act 1 stage directions, the opening, because it's at that moment that Priestley is setting up his characters, and how they're presented at the start is really important when you think about the structure of the play and how characters either change or remain static. But this stage direction suggests a really immature nature, a pretty girl in her early 20s, very pleased with life and rather excited. To me, that just suggests she's a bit overexcited, very immature. The language doesn't suggest a mature lady at all. She begins the play by being pleased and excited about the prospect of her marriage. Now, again, that's important because this does change. So you have to be able to talk about the way things are different at the start to how they end up being at the end. When the inspector arrives, she is visibly distressed when she hears that a young woman has taken her own life. So Sheila goes through this change, but the process of change actually begins really quite quickly. So even before she learns of her involvement, she does seem very distressed and very upset by the thought of a young woman taking her own life. So that is sort of a precursor to her changing, and it does demonstrate to the audience that she clearly does have that empathetic emotional side to her that clearly is going to be tapped into. Despite this, she's still very naive. At one point she asks, was it an accident? Almost as if to suggest she thinks it's possible that drinking a ton of disinfectant could even be something you would do on purpose. There is a slight naivety there, but the point is her emotions are being tapped into straight away in a way that greatly contrasts her parents. So after the interrogation of Mr. Burling, we learnt that Sheila was responsible for Eva Smith's dismissal from Millwards. So Sheila got particularly angry at Eva Smith for nothing other than just having Eva look at her in a certain way that she thought was in ridicule of her. And there was a jealousy there. There was a jealousy because Eva was a very pretty young woman. And she didn't believe that the dress she was wearing was going to look as flattering on her as it did on Eva, or would on Eva. But this jealousy sparked in her something really quite nasty. And obviously, as a result, she used her power of the family to get her dismissed from the shop that she was working at. And obviously what we learn is that this opportunity to work at the shop came as like almost a saving grace after the fact that she was fired from working for Mr. Burling. So this is actually going to have a huge impact on Eva. Obviously, Sheila doesn't know that, but what she will learn is that her actions, even though they seem very insignificant at the time, play into a much bigger picture. Sheila is able to recognise long before any of the other characters that the inspector cannot be lied to. So Sheila, as I said already, is very quick to start showing signs of the ability to change, and she's very switched on to what's happening compared to her parents in particular. After learning how they each played a part in the death of Eva Smith, Sheila breaks off her engagement with Gerald. Her finding out about Gerald's affair with Daisy Renton / Eva Smith was a big influence in this. And this showed a real turning point for Sheila that we'll talk about briefly later. The fact that she actively makes that decision. Now, remember how excited she was at the beginning. One evening has caused her to completely go back on that now. She reveals that Eric drinks too much, and she acknowledges her role in Eva Smith's downfall and takes the inspector's words to heart. So Sheila demonstrates exactly what Priestley wanted in his audience as well, the fact that the words they're hearing need to have impact, and that impact then needs to result in change in society. So let's just talk about Sheila's importance. So I've got this image of a jigsaw puzzle, and you need to consider the whole play like a jigsaw. Each character, or maybe each theme, but in this instance we're going to talk about character, is a piece of that jigsaw puzzle. And without that piece, as you can see, that red piece, if that was taken out, that picture is not complete. So I want you to consider the fact that every character, and in this video obviously with reference mainly to Sheila, you have to consider the fact that the whole picture of the play is not complete without her. She is absolutely crucial to the plot, to the message as well. So to be successful in your exam, you need to be able to discuss how Sheila fits into the bigger picture. How does her role add to the message that Priestley is trying to deliver through this play? Okay, so you've got to think, what's her purpose? Why is she there? How does she contribute to the message that Priestley is trying to deliver? So unlike her parents and Gerald, Sheila and Eric go through a transformation during this play. Her parents and Gerald are very static, meaning that they sort of stay in the same place the whole way. Nothing really changes for them in terms of their attitudes, their capitalist ideas. Whereas Sheila and Eric definitely go through this transformation, and they end up having sympathy for the socialist cause. She is greatly affected by hers and her family's involvement in Eva Smith's death. So the fact that it hits her so hard highlights her importance because she's showing the audience the ability we have to change. She respects Gerald for his honesty about the affair, but also has the courage to end their engagement. This is, as I've said, a really important thing about her. Her finding that courage is part of the transformation that happens in this play for her, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So she changes from an immature girl with concerns only for frivolous things to a woman who can own her mistakes and learn from them. By the end of the play, she believes in the need for social change. So at the beginning, we've already seen from the stage directions that she does come across as highly mature. Her language suggests this as well. And Priestley uses Sheila to contrast her parents and highlight the ability for the younger generations to change. Sorry, what I was trying to say there is Priestley has used Sheila to contrast with her parents. So by the end of the play, we see that Sheila, who started off with the same sort of attitudes as her parents as a result of growing up in the same household, he then compares that image of them at the start with that image then of them at the end, where Sheila is not taking her parents' ignorance anymore. She's very much changed in her belief, and the way in which she interacts with her parents shows this as well. So a final thing in terms of Sheila's importance is she is a symbol of hope for the audience in 1945, that she is hope that there can be change, that even with the most capitalist of attitudes, you can see the importance for shared social responsibility. So to talk about her change, we need to be able to think about how she is right at the start. So we've already talked about those opening stage directions, but with her language, it's very infantile, very immature, juvenile. So obviously she refers to her parents as mummy and daddy, and we know from the opening stage directions that she's in her early 20s. This is not a way in which we would assume that someone in their early 20s might refer to their parents. It does show that childish nature, but they reciprocate this by calling her child and saying that she's childish as well. So it's not just her infantile attitude to the parents, they're sort of perpetuating it themselves. So they consider her to be very childish and immature. She's very materialistic as well. The engagement ring saying she says that she'll never let it out of her sight. So her focus is on how beautiful and how wonderful this very expensive piece of jewelry is now. And the fact that she says, now I really feel engaged, as if the engagement was not like a promise made between two people and a commitment of love. What signifies that engagement for her really is wearing the ring, the jewelry. So again, that just shows you where she places importance. And she says, I'll never let it go from my sight for an instant. Again, highlighting just that materialistic approach, I guess, the fact that that is to her what's important, rather than the bond and the promise of commitment that is now in place between her and Gerald. So she's actually presented as an inferior character as well. She's spoken to like a child and dismissed by others a couple of times quite early in the play. So when Gerald is being interrogated, he says, I think Miss Burling ought to be excused. Now, obviously from the play, we know that this is because what Gerald is about to reveal is the kind of thing you wouldn't want your fiancé listening to. But the fact that he thinks he is dominant enough to just dismiss her says a lot about how she's treated, but it's also quite typical of maybe how the female might be treated, as if they're a bit too delicate to listen to this. So yeah, he gets rid of her. And a couple of times, both Mr. Burling and Mrs. Burling talk about upsetting the child, as if it's all too much for her. But obviously, the irony here is that actually she's the one that handles it, and she's the one that learns from it. The others just completely disregard what's happening because it doesn't fit with the life that they have. And she's very similar in age to Eva. This is another thing. Eva and Sheila are sort of mirror images of each other, and it's there to create that contrast as well, so that you can see how awfully someone like Eva was treated as a result of her being born into a lower class family. And Sheila, is protected by her family. Her status and her wealth ensures she will always have that good life. Obviously, she does need to secure that marriage, but being in a position of wealth means that she's got that security that someone like Eva will never have. And the only difference really is which families they were born into. So Sheila's Change then. At the start of the play, she is egotistical, she's materialistic, she's immature, but she becomes serious quite quickly after hearing that a young woman has committed suicide. She then begins to question her own behaviour and regrets how she treated Eva Smith. So we see from the retelling of events with her behaviour towards Eva that her attitude and her behaviour was awful, like a petulant child. But the fact that as soon as the inspector arrives, she can reflect on that, and she very quickly realises that that behaviour has caused something devastating to happen. So yeah, she doesn't, like her mother, she doesn't insist that she's done nothing wrong. She's quite quick to own up to that, which is an important thing for her. She reprimands Gerald and is brave enough to accept that she should not be treated so poorly, but she is gracious enough to leave the possibility of reconciliation open. So in Act 2, when she gives the ring back to him and she says, "But this has made a difference. You and I aren't the same people who sat down to dinner here. We'd have to start all over again, getting to know each other." So this piece of evidence is important because it's showing that she acknowledges that the Sheila and Gerald that sat down at the start of the night are not the same Sheila and Gerald that they are now. And it's because of all the truth that's come out and the fact that they have learnt of their impact on someone else's life. Now, Sheila has learnt from that, and she realises that the Sheila she was before is not the Sheila she can ever be again. But because Gerald hasn't made those same steps and is still quite insistent on maintaining his capitalist views, part of her clearly sees that they are no longer the compatible couple they once believed themselves to be. But this is a really good moment for her because it shows that bravery. Remember I said that the importance of securing a marriage as a woman, especially one that could sort of move you up in society, like her marriage to Gerald would. It's so important to women, or it was at the time, and she's actively making that decision to end that engagement. That's a big deal for her. So at the end of Act 1, she says, and stage directions, laughs rather hysterically. "Why, you fool, he knows. Of course he knows, and I hate to think how much he knows that we don't know yet. You'll see, you'll see." So in terms of the quickness of that change, this is the end of Act 1 of a 3-act play. So she's got a lot of development still to go, but quite quickly she's cottoned on to what's happening here. So there's a dramatic shift in her personality. It's become quite fiery. The fact that she laughs hysterically, almost as if she thinks the rest of her family are ridiculous for not seeing this. And fool, she calls him a fool. And it's that you'll see. She's so sure of herself, and she's so confident that that she understands something that they're not, and it must be incredibly frustrating for her, as we see as the play goes on, that those other characters are not understanding. So later in the play, there does show some maturity. She refers to her parents now as mother and father, so it shows that change. And when the inspector leaves, Sheila takes on language that is very similar to the inspector. She quickly understands the idea of social responsibility, but it's the fact that she continues the effort to bring this about amongst her family. She almost steps into the shoes of the inspector and continues to interrogate and continues to deliver the message of social responsibility, and she continues to really question and interrogate their capitalist feelings towards what has happened. So to her father, she says, "No, because I remember what he said, how he looked, and what he made me feel. Fire and blood and anguish. And it frightens me the way you talk, and I can't listen to any more of it." So that bit in bold and underlined, fire and blood and anguish, they're the exact same words that the inspector used as well to talk about the consequences of not changing to a more socialist way of life. So just to look very quickly then at how her relationship with her parents change. So in Act 1, Burling angrily, "Why the devil do you want to go upsetting the child like that?" What we're trying to show here is the fact that he calls her child, and the fact that he's angry that they might upset her shows how little they think of Sheila in terms of being able to cope with something like this. And as I've said already, the irony there is that actually she does very, very well. And this was said just after the inspector shows Sheila the picture of Eva Smith. Then in Act 2, Mrs. Burling, "You seem to have made a great impression on this child, Inspector." Again, highlighting the fact that both parents consider her to be a child. And then later, when Sheila wants to listen to what has happened and to hear about their involvement in what's happened with Eva Smith, Mrs. Burling just disregards that as nothing but morbid curiosity. And obviously what that means is morbid, the desire to know about things that are not very nice. So she's completely disregarding the fact that her daughter actually is trying to show a maturity and to learn something about herself here, and her mother disregards it completely. So in Act 3, we do see that her interactions with her parents do take a bit of a turn. So Sheila says, "I behaved badly too. I know I did. I'm ashamed of it. But now you're beginning all over again to pretend that nothing much has happened." Burling, "Nothing much has happened. Haven't I already said that there'll be a public scandal unless we're lucky? And who here will suffer from that more than I will? But that's not what I'm talking about. I don't care about that. The point is, you don't seem to have learnt anything." So here, Burling particularly shows himself off to be a very self-centered, egotistical man here. The fact that he says nothing much has happened, what he's referring to is the fact that his family will be shown to the public as being involved in this great scandal, and that's what he's concerned about. And the fact that he says, "Who here will suffer for that more than I will?" His concern is mainly with himself, and Sheila's frustrations are the fact that her parents don't seem to understand that really that the concern should not be about them. It's about how they've mistreated someone, and then what ultimately happened as a result of that. So when she says, you don't seem to have learned anything. Now, I don't care about that. She's really fighting back against her parents now and talking back in a mature manner. Almost, it is defiance, but it's defiance for the cause of socialism. And that is what's being presented in a positive light here. And it's Burling that's presented negatively and very ignorant here. So later again in Act 3, you'll stay here long enough to give me an account of that money you stole, yes, and pay it back too. So Burling here is talking to Eric, insisting that he pays back the money. But Sheila comes straight back to say, but that won't bring Eva Smith back to life, will it? Now, the reason I've pulled this bit is because the conversation's actually between Eric and Burling, but I just want to highlight to you Sheila's sort of newfound confidence and ability to speak her mind, the fact that she interjects with this comment. And obviously it's got a tone to it that maybe you wouldn't expect to use it with your parents, especially considering how she was at the beginning. It does show that real development in her character. And then a bit more of a longer one, but the last little bit we'll look at in terms of this change in relationship with her parents. So Burling giving him a drink. Yes, he didn't keep you on the run as he did the rest of us. I'll admit now he gave me a bit of a scare at the time, but I had a special reason for not wanting any public scandal just now. Has his drink now and raises his glass. Well, here's to us. Come on, Sheila, don't look like that. All over now. Sheila, the worst part is, but you're forgetting one thing I still can't forget. Everything we said had happened really had happened. If it didn't end tragically, then that's lucky for us, but it might have done. Burling, jovially, but the whole thing's different now. Come, you see that, can't you? Imitating Inspector in his final speech. You all helped kill her, pointing at Sheila and Eric and laughing, and I wish you could have seen the look on your faces when he said that. Sheila moves towards the door. Going to bed, young woman? Sheila, tensely. I want to get out of this. It frightens me the way you talk. Burling, heartily. Nonsense. You'll have a good laugh over it yet. Look, you'd better ask Gerald for that ring back you gave back to him, hadn't you? Then you'll feel better. Sheila, passionately. You're pretending everything's just as it was before. So this exchange happens after Gerald has come back with the news that the phone call, none of it was real, apparently, to them. And obviously this is just before they get the phone call to tell them that an inspector is coming. So what you will notice is the relief in Burling. And the fact that he goes, well, here's to us, celebrating the family almost as a relief that they get away with what has happened. He says, come on, Sheila, don't look like that. It's all over now. And that is what sparks this real rage in Sheila, which says, yes, the worst part is, but she cannot comprehend the fact that he doesn't understand that despite the fact that that inspector might not have been real, what happened was real. What they've done is real. And therefore, whether the inspector was real or not, their behaviour has to change. And the fact that Burling says, but the whole thing's different now, as if somehow the inspector not being who they thought he was causes all of this to change in his mind now, that it's not something of any significance. But he laughs and he mocks, imitating the inspector, and then sort of says, oh, I wish you could have seen the look on your face, as if say you all look terrified. But that terror was genuine on their faces, and so it should have been. What is actually awful is the fact that Burling and Mrs. Burling don't see that. They don't have that look on their face, and that to the audience is what's really frightening. And then Sheila, she takes up this opportunity and she just goes to leave I want to get out of this. It frightens me the way you talk. So very quickly, I suppose, in the course of one evening, she's now fearful of the attitudes of her parents, and she can see that they are not changing, which is very worrying for her after everything she's learnt of herself and her family. And Burling again comes back with, oh, go on, just get the ring back, you'll feel better. He just shrugs all of this off as if nothing has happened, and the change that has occurred in Sheila and Eric has not occurred in him, and therefore he doesn't seem to understand why she is so moved by everything that's happened. But again, as I mentioned, he is presented through his characterization in a very negative light. And it's the changing characters that are presented much more favourably. So just to finish then on a quick word about the assessment objectives. So I want to just remind you what it is you're going to be assessed on. So AO1 is your ability to read, understand and respond to text. Students should be able to maintain a critical style and develop an informed personal response using textual references, including quotations to support and illustrate interpretations. So this really is all about your ability to present your ideas, use appropriate language to do so, and use evidence to support those ideas and interpretations. Okay, so AO2 is your analysis. It's your ability then to move on from your references and then comment on how this language choice or structural choice presents the writer's message, or how does it help create meaning or deliver the writer's intentions. Okay, so analyse the language, form and structure used by writers to create meanings and effect using relevant subject terminology where appropriate. Now this is where for a play in particular you need to remember that things such as stage directions, exits and entrances, lighting, all of those things are methods that you can talk about, but they're very specific to plays. And you need to remember, especially in AO2, with a play, it is a performance, and you do need to talk about it with an audience in mind. You have to talk about it as if it's something to be watched. Remember, it's not something that was meant to just be read. And then AO3, finally, show it understanding of the relationship between text and the context in which they were written. So for Sheila, for example, this would be talking about maybe women's position in society, marriage, what it was like at the time, maybe the patriarchy, understanding life in the Edwardian era, class divides, and how that affected different people right at the top compared to right at the bottom, like Eva. Okay, so thanks for joining. I hope it's been useful. Yeah, thank you.